My dear friends, Pontius Pilate is one of the most fascinating people that we see recorded for us in the scriptures. Historically, we don't know a ton about him. He was likely a wealthy, politically connected citizen of Rome, the Roman Empire. He probably served in the military at some point. Uh, but at this time, Pontius Pilate was serving the one position that no one in his right mind would ever want to serve, the governor of Judea. You see, the Roman Empire conquered what is now Israel, Judea at Jesus' time, but they really did not care for the people that were there. The Romans saw the Jews as these odd religious fanatics. These Jewish people that they were obsessive about their holy book, which they thought was the unadulterated word from their God, which they thought was the only God in existence. Again, from Roman eyes, that was very odd. The Romans saw these Jews as obnoxious and annoying, especially because the Jewish people had this belief that this Messiah, that this anointed one, this Christ, this special ruler would rise from their people and set them free from all their enemies. And so the Roman soldiers and the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, had to deal with all these different people rising up and claiming to be the Christ, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. And they would have to constantly put down these insurrectionists and these rebellions. But there's one day where the chief priests and the elders of the law, right, the Jewish religious authorities in Jerusalem actually bring one of these supposed insurrections, these false messiahs, to Pontius Pilate, but he's not like the rest of them. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. And this is it's really odd. Normally, the Jewish leaders wouldn't actually ask Pontius Pilate and the Roman Empire to execute one of these uprisers, one of these insurrectionists. Probably secretly they were hoping that they would actually kick out the Romans. They were kind of secretly rooting for them. The Jewish leaders and the Roman leaders had this strenuous relationship. So how odd that they would be the ones to request that this person be executed. Why? Well, because he claimed to be the king of the Jews. He told us to rebel against the Romans. And yet Pontius Pilate, he hears about this Jesus of Nazareth, and he's nothing like the rest of these people claiming to be the king of the Jews. You see, Pontius Pilate knew that the real reason why the Jewish religious leaders were trying to kill Jesus was really because they were jealous of him. They were jealous of his ability to be a great teacher of the word and that people were listening to him rather than them. And he actually knew too that his wife had this dream warning her and him to stay away, not have anything to do with this Jesus of Nazareth. And so Pontius Pilate is just curious. Well, what is it about this man? Why do his own people want to kill him so badly? And so he brings Jesus of Nazareth into the praetorium, the Roman palace. And he asks him what he has to ask him. Are you the king of the Jews? And he's expecting Jesus to say, no, I'm not the Jews. Please don't kill me. This isn't what I'm trying to do. But Jesus doesn't do that. No, Jesus knows that when Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" he means that king in a political way. And so Jesus isn't going to say yes, he's the king of the Jews, because that would give Pilate the wrong idea. But he also doesn't say no, because in reality, Jesus is a king. He is the king over the entire universe. And so what he does is he kind of responds to Pilate's question with a question which you did not do to Pilate. That would have been wild for someone to do. But he says, are you asking me because you really want to know more about it? Or are you asking me because you're the governor and you have to because this is an accusation that I'm starting an insurrection? Well, then Pilate retorts and says, what do I do? Do I look like I care about all these silly religious agreements that you people are after amongst yourselves? I don't care. Clearly, you are not a king. You are covered in blood. You have been beaten up by your own people. You have no followers that are trying to defend you. Clearly, you are not a king. Clearly, you are not a threat to Roman rule. And yet, your people want to kill you. Why? What have you done? Well, then Jesus responds and says, my kingship, the kingdom that is mine. And the Greek here is really fascinating. The English maybe wasn't the best translation when it says my kingdom. Literally in Greek, it says the kingdom that happens to be mine is not of this world. And what Jesus is saying is this. He's saying, Governor Pontius Pilate, you are the governor because your authority came from somewhere on earth. Caesar appointed you as governor of this place. And you're governor because people call you governor. And any king is a king because people are under him and call him a king. And yet me, I'm different. Not me. I'm a king regardless of what people think. I'm a king regardless of who knows it. In fact, even if they kill me, I am a king and I am in control of this entire universe. I am a king. And then Pilate starts to kind of realize what Jesus is saying. And then when he says, so you are a king, then he doesn't say king of the Jews. No, he recognizes that Jesus is saying something very different. Saying you are a king. But again, in Pontius Pilate's he's a Roman. And see the world through the lens of power and ambition and might. Kings are powerful. Kings take their swords out and slay their enemies and demand that you obey or else. And Jesus isn't that. Jesus just isn't that. And what Jesus seems to be talking about in Pilate's mind, about how he has this authority not from any person, but actually from a different world. And that he actually is not from here. From in Pilate's mind, Jesus isn't really talking about himself as a king as much as God. And then Jesus says, yeah, you're absolutely correct. That's true. That in fact, that's why I came into this world. Yes, I was born a human being, but I'm not from, I entered this world. I existed before I was born physically. I've always been. And I have come into this world to bring people to the side of the truth. And Jesus is saying that unlike you, Pilate, my kingdom, my kingship, my rule is about power and authority and making people do what I say. It's about truth and bringing people to the side of the truth. And those who hear the truth and obey the truth and listen to the truth and trust me and my truth, those people are in my kingdom. And Jesus here is bringing out a very important, powerful, profound, meaningful point. That all human beings are under the impression and the domination of lies. Think about this. Why does an alcoholic or any other addict keep going to that drink, keep going to that thing that they're addicted to? Well, because they are under the impression of a lie, right? If I get this thing, well, then my problems will be solved and then I'll be happy. I need that one more drink, that one more hit. And if I have that, I'll be happy. It's a lie. Why do people steal? Why do each other? Why do people do bad things? Well, because they are under the impression of a lie. I'm better than this person. I can do what I want, and nothing's going to happen to me. If it does, too bad. I confess that's a lie. So the truth is that all of us, every single human being, are under the impressions of lies. And it goes back to Satan's lie in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, that one lie, you can't trust your father. Adam, Eve, you can't trust your father. You need to eat this fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because you have to show him you can't trust your father when he tells you not to eat that. You need to take things into your own hands with your own hands. That's what sin is. And so all of us are under the impression of lies whenever we sin, especially now, that lie that either, well, God doesn't really care about how I live my life, and he's kind of okay with my bad habits, and they're really not bad habits, they're actually good habits, and if you don't like it, too bad. Or the habit that says, well, okay, well, clearly I'm not good enough, but maybe if I work hard enough, I do enough good things, and I'm religious enough, well, then I can be acceptable to God. All of us are under the impression of lies, and Jesus comes and tells the truth. That all of us are sinful and blind and wretched and disgusting before God, and yet Jesus the King has entered this world, and he the King, instead of taking out his sword and slaying his enemies, has actually been slain by his enemies in our place. And those who believe in him, who hear his voice and listen to the truth and trust the truth, will be accepted and forgiven in his kingdom. So that's the conversation between Jesus and Pilate. And there's two major things that I want you to take away from this. Number one, don't be deceived by appearances. And number two, don't look for a heavenly kingdom here on earth. Number one, don't be deceived by appearances. Again, Jesus as king and seeing Jesus as king has been a hard thing ever since Jesus was on earth, and it always has been hard. Pilate wasn't the only one deeply shocked by Jesus. When you think of a king, right, you think of someone powerful, someone worth following. It's someone who's big and strong and charismatic and a good fighter, and they have a lot of people willing to protect them, and bodyguards, and a lot of riches and a lot of wealth, right? But that wasn't Jesus. Now, Isaiah prophesied centuries before Jesus that he's not going to have any majesty or beauty to attract us to him. Jesus was kind of just a regular person. And he was pretty much homeless for most of his ministry. He was a traveling teacher depending on the generosity of those who trusted in his teachings. And he didn't have a cohort or of bodyguards and an army to go fight for him. No, he had, 12 really average-looking disciples who went out and preached the truth to people. And Jesus was really not what anyone was expecting. The Pharisees didn't like Jesus. Oh, some of them came to faith in Jesus, but a lot of them didn't like him, well, especially because, Jesus was supposed to be this great teacher of the word. And it means that he's a high moral figure, and then he goes and eats with the tax prostitutes and the sinners. And Jesus says, no, they need to repent. And Pharisees, so do you. Well, the Pharisees didn't like him, and so they rejected him. Most people in Jesus' day rejected him because instead of saying, hey, we're going to go kick out the Romans and we're going to have to hide here in Israel, he said, no, actually, if you're going to follow me, you need to take up your cross. You're going to suffer in this world. This world isn't your home. You need to set your eyes on the new world that I'm going to make for you. And people didn't like it. And as he stands with Pontius Pilate, Pilate is completely confused. And you kings take out the sword and they kill people. He's not a strong leader. He's a suffering king. Suffering king. And yet that's the whole point of Christianity. That Jesus is the true king of the entire universe. And every atom of every molecule is held together by the sound of his voice, but by the power of his will. And yet he, the king, entered into this world among his subjects, not to kill his enemies, but to let his enemies kill him. Why? Because that is the only way that he could take us into his arms. That he needed to die. He needed to die in the place of sinners so that sinners like us who deserve to die can live forever with him. That is how he won his cosmic victory over sin and death and hell by dying and then rising from the grave. Now, don't be deceived by appearances. You think about this. You and I, as Christians, are heirs of the glory in the throne of Jesus Christ himself. Or think about it, that is the God of heaven and earth has looked at you and said, you are my people. You are my glorious pride. And yet, would anyone who looks at you guess that about you or me? Probably not. You think about it, the lowliest, poorest Christian is in reality wealthier than Elon Musk. Would anyone guess that by looking at us? Probably not. You think about what's happening in this building, right? That truth that Jesus is talking about, that truth that everyone is searching for on the highest level, everyone is deeply looking for the truth. And, well, it's preached here, just in the Word, right? We have the words of the mysterious God of the universe himself. The riches of his Word are just given here. And think about God himself. Think about how many people in this world are looking for God and doing everything they can to find God. And yet, in a few minutes, God himself is going to be present in his true body and blood in the Lord's Supper. He is going to be here in this miraculous way that we can't even understand. And yet, would anyone driving on Main Street look at this building and guess that is what's happening here? Would they have any idea that that kind of thing is happening? And think about this too. As you look out in the world, does it seem like Jesus is winning? When you look up into the world and you see all the things that are happening, does it seem like Jesus is truly king and that he is in true control? Probably not. But don't be fooled by appearances. He is in control. He is at work. And if you look closely enough, you are going to see that he is growing his kingdom one by one. And that brings me to my second point. Don't expect a heavenly kingdom here on earth. Maybe you've heard this. I've certainly heard this just over the last few years. I think it's been always a kind of something that people have said in American culture, but I think it definitely got ramped up in the last five or so years, where people say, well, America used to be this Christian nation. We used to be a good, God-fearing country and culture, and now we completely turned away from God, and we need to bring America back to so that we can have a God-pleasing country for God, and that kind of thing. And anyone hear anything like that? Well, that's something that the Jews of Jesus' day were saying as well. We need to bring our country back to God. They look with this nostalgia back to, 1,000 years before then when David and Solomon were in charge of Israel and Israel was God's people and everything was awesome, which when you look at the Old Testament actually wasn't that awesome. But again, that's kind of how they viewed it. And they said, well, now we're ruled by these pagan elements, and we need to bring Israel back to God and bring the country back to God so that God can be our leader. And yet Jesus, God himself, comes and says, that's not how this works. My kingdom is not of this world. Right? I'm not here to be your earthly governmental leader. That's not how this works. And yet people have been making that mistake for the last 2,000 years. You look at Europe, right? The Holy Roman Empire in Italy and parts of Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, England, right? They want to be Christian nations. And they're going to make the government Christian, make this nation Christian, which means that you have to go to church. And if you don't, then you're in trouble with the law. Well, okay. And okay, you can't just blame the Catholics because Lutherans did it too. You look at Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, right? Those were Lutheran nations. And even today in Sweden, right, you have to be a part of the Lutheran Church. Okay, so they had these Lutheran countries where everyone had to be, Luther or Christian or whatever it was. You have to be Christian. You have to go to church. You have to do Christian things. And you have these big, beautiful cathedrals, big, right? Well, what do they all have in common? They're empty. No one goes. No one really there truly believes, and that's been that way for the last 200, 300 years. You can't make people Christians through the laws of the government. That's not how Jesus' kingdom works. And again, people are trying to do it in the United States. Right? We need to have the 10 Commandments on every classroom in a public school. Our public schools need to have a specific time of prayer, and that they need to teach the Bible in the public school. That's not how God's kingdom works. When people say, oh, well, we need to have Christians in the government, and the government needs to endorse Christianity. We need to be a Christian nation with a Christian culture. That's not how Jesus' kingdom works. You can't force people to believe in Jesus or to live Jesus' way through the laws of the government. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. And I know how frustrating it is. I know how frustrating it is when you look out in your culture and you see people completely reject God's plan for marriage or God's view of life or God's view of love and helping people and serving people, right? I know how frustrating that is. I know how frustrating it is when people twist things and call evil good and good evil. Well, if you really want to change people, right? If you want people to truly be changed, it's not going to be voting for the right person. It's not going to be for lobbying for the right policy change or protesting for a cause. That's not how you change hearts. The way that Jesus changes hearts is through the truth, the gospel. That Jesus, your King, willingly became your servant, let himself be slain in your place so that he could embrace you into his kingdom. And if you trust in him, you are completely forgiven, completely accepted, completely brought in and as a part of his family. The truth of the gospel. And it is through that Jesus changes hearts and brings people unto him, to accept him and to love him, and therefore to accept his rules and his way of how we're supposed to live. It's through the gospel that one by one, Jesus' kingdom comes. Amen.